Hello, welcome to International House of Japan in Tokyo. Thank you very much for joining us. This is the fourth session of the webinar series, Leaders Shaping the Future of the Indo-Pacific. Now, this session is called The Future of Architecture, Creating New Spaces and Connections. I'm Fiona Wilson. I'm Asia Bureau Chief for Monocle magazine. Magazine's based in London. I'm based here in Tokyo. I've been writing about Japanese architecture for many years, so I'm thrilled to be here. Particularly in this building, which I love. It was built in 1955, as you just heard, designed by three of Japan's most important 20th century architects. And we're lucky to be joined today by two of Asia's preeminent contemporary architects. Sou Fujimoto is here with me in Tokyo, and in Singapore we have Summ Wong. If I could just say a few words about these architects. Sou Fujimoto was brought up in a small rural town in Hokkaido, in the far north of Japan. Put aside early dreams of becoming a mathematician to train as an architect. He founded his studio in Tokyo in 2000, and since then he's gone on to build a number of award-winning structures, such as the Serpentine Gallery Pavilion in London. He also has an office in Paris. He's received much praise for buildings such as L'Arbre Blanc, the White Tree, a multi-purpose tower in Montpellier. And he is the site producer for the 2025 Expo, which will be held in Osaka. Summ Wong is the co-founder of the Singapore-based architectural practice WOHA. Studio has earned a reputation for addressing some of the globe's most pressing problems, from climate change to increasing urbanisation, and finding solutions that bring human scale, community, and plenty of greenery, even in areas of high density. WOHA have built all over Southeast Asia and beyond, and have won numerous awards for buildings such as the Singapore School of the Arts, Park Royal, a high-rise development in Singapore with a series of elevated sky gardens. WOHA is also behind the book Garden City, Megacity, Rethinking Cities in the Age of Global Warming, which is a thoughtful manifesto and something of a call to arms. So welcome to you both. Thanks very much for joining us. Perhaps I could start with you, Summ. Good to see you there. Could you just tell us about some of the projects you're working on?
I will show 5 slides, 5 projects, and I'll briefly talk about them. Slide 1 is the Singapore Pavilion. It's a zero energy and self-sufficient pavilion, creating an oasis in a desert. It's an immersive environment that hopefully we bring Singapore to Dubai, and also postulate a possibility of a different way of building in the Middle East. Slide 2, which is our project called Pan Pacific Orchard, is a bit of a building on steroid where we have created multiple boutique hotels within a hotel itself, creating multiple ground levels, high density and also high amenity, creating a forest floor as arrival, a beach on the 2nd level, a curated garden, and then a winter garden on the roof level. So this is a sort of a hotel along Orchard Road that would rethink what hotels would be in a city. Slide 3 is a master plan, and also the buildings are also designed by us now. It's the Singapore Institute of Technology, new campus, and also Punggol Digital District. I've shown this slide primarily because I wanted to show that we wanted foremost was to conserve as much of the nature as possible, and to create a focal point, which is this community park, which is this conserved forest, as the focus for the university and the master plan. But the main heavy lifting is actually done in the subterranean, where the logistic and the infrastructure is, and that enables us to actually conserve such a large area such as this as the focal point and park for the community and the new master plan and district. Slide 4 is a competition that we took part in which we won. in Hangzhou called the Future City. Here, we wanted to create an integrated development within the inner city that helps to rejuvenate the older areas. And here you see that we have created a lot of interconnected structures to connect the buildings, emphasizing on slow mobility, social corridors, and even mahjong cabanas. And the last slide is a short video clip of slide 5. It's a short video clip of a series of master plans that we are doing, which we entitled them 50-50 cities.
Wow, thank you very much. Wonderful building there. I was just interested to see just how different the climate is. We're in the middle of a very dry Japanese winter, so seeing all that lovely tropical greenery is making me quite jealous. But I think we can see how important greenery is to your work, and I think that's something we want to talk about. Can I just turn to you first, though, Sou Fujimoto? Tell us about your work.
Okay. Hi, good evening. So please show the slide 1. So the slide 1 is showing my background. I was growing up in Hokkaido. It's like the nature field, small town. So I was playing around in a forest. And then when I get into university, I moved to Tokyo. It's like a, crazy, messy, artificial situation. But both of them are very important for me. And that is why I try to integrate those nature environment and artifacts environment together, not only physically, but also like a conceptually or like as an experience. And all of my architecture work and architecture thinking is really relating to these basics. And the next one, please. And this is the Serpentine Pavilion, 2013, already 7 years ago. And it is like a very light, thin structures, which is creating such a blurring boundaries between inside and outside, between artifacts, really thin, straight steel structures, and the trees around it. And also it is creating nice interactions between the human behaviors and those steps inside and outside. So interactive relationships between the human body, it's part of the nature, and the architectural spaces. And so this was one of the trials to create physically blurring the boundaries, but at the same time integrating all of those kind of different scales and melting different things like a straightness and softness, or like a light feelings, and then more like the furniture feelings, and so on. And next one, please. So this is one of the early works in Hokkaido, which is like the medical facility for kids. And we try to create like the fields for kids to play around and sometimes choose their own places. That is why we scattered those boxes randomly to create like artificial forest-like spaces. So some areas quite open and the large spaces, but some areas is like the hidden corner where you can, hide yourself or have a chat with your friends, 2-3 friends. So interrelationships of people to people, interrelationships between the space and the persons. So various relationships by the various people could be realized. So it is like an artificial forest in a sense. The next one, please. So this is a private house, creating such the gradient layers from the privacy to the public, and also from inside and outside to create such an in-between spaces. Because, yeah, I like to open the box, or I like to make the boundary more blurring to get more nature in, or to have the multiple relationships between your personal area and the urban area. So to create such the many diverse choices for the people to put yourself, gets more closer to your privacy, or to come out to the urban situation, or somewhere in between. And also the interfaces to the nature as well, not just too much exposing to the nature, or not shut out the nature, but they are creating such the ranges between the artifacts and the nature. And the next one, please. And yeah, this is the last one. This is the housing in Montpellier. It's a beautiful Mediterranean climate. So we created so huge, crazy balconies a lot. And as a result, it is like the expression of course, openness, but not only for each balconies, but because of those floating balconies, you feel you are linked to your neighbors vertically, three-dimensionally, with a proper distances. So you keep your privacy, but at the same time, you are connecting to the neighborhood. And then it is like a recreation or reinvention of like a community, neighborhood community in a new way. And of course, it's open to the surrounding urban conditions. So it is also open to the neighbors around it. So it is like a new vertical villages in a sense. Thank you very much.
Thanks. That's absolutely wonderful to see those. It's so interesting. Your work's quite different, but it's interesting how you both are very interested in community and how you relate to nature and that sort of personal connection. How do you connect to the people around you? And I feel like this last year has been really difficult. That connecting with other people has completely changed. And I just wondered, perhaps I start with you, Summ. How do you feel this last year? How has COVID impacted your work, your world, actually?
I think it's a wake-up call, if anything, for us. I think we are not that badly affected, primarily because Singapore is sort of pretty advanced in digitization. So moving online for most things was quite easy. But I think the thing that I find particularly refreshing in some ways is not to travel for business and to do most of the work online. And I think that goes a long way in addressing climate change too. So I think in some ways there's a silver lining to this pandemic.
Yeah, it's good to know we've all contributed to easing climate change. Inadvertently, we didn't mean it to happen. In fact, we were talking about this earlier, weren't we? And I think you were saying also that it was one of the big changes for you over this last year that you weren't traveling, but you saw that in a slightly different way, that you'd almost lost some private time.
Yeah, of course, the previously I was traveling around almost like a half of the year in abroad and in an airplane. And of course, at that time, it was a precious time for me to be isolated in the airplane or isolated in the airport. So it was like a time for me to think more deeper. So at the very beginning of the last year, I was rather like confused because suddenly I lost that kind of precious time. And then gradually, try to use to those like online situation. And finally, as an architect, I realized, of course, we have to use to those kind of a more online situation. But at the same time, we realized such a preciousness of the real space and the real communications. So after those crises, I believe our mindset is like more and more appreciate the value of the space, but of course, properly designed spaces or value of, coming together. And at the same time, we can have more choices. So we can have more diverse kind of alternative to make more communications. So finally, both of the real world and the virtual world should be reappreciated again and again, more and more after this crisis, I think. And that must be very, very, wonderful thing.
Yeah, it's good to be positive about it, isn't it? I mean, I think one of the interesting things, living in Tokyo, really this huge megalopolis, you do feel like this narrative that urbanization is unstoppable has slightly been halted. It's been stopped in its tracks. Suddenly, we're thinking about cities in a very different way, and a lot of people do not want to be in the middle of a city. So I think that's a big discussion. Summ, can I ask you, because I know you're very concerned with high density building, in a city. How's it impacting your work?
I think the pandemic has confirmed a few things about cities. Cities is where business and money is being made. And also at the same time, equally, is where healthcare is readily available. I think it's the rural areas that suffers a little bit more, where they can't get the healthcare, and whereas the cities are the ones that are able to provide healthcare at the doorstep of everyone's homes. And I think it's also the state of healthcare that may be an issue as well. So I don't think that urbanization will discontinue, but I think the people are going to be asking more about new cities. Can cities provide high density and equally high amenity? Which is something that's central to our work, where we think it's actually possible, like the project that I showed in slide 2 with Pan Pacific Orchard, where we provided almost 4 the same footprint of the site as outdoor spaces. One was a forest, one was a beach, one was a curated garden, and then a winter garden at the top as well. But I think that's something that I think maybe architects and also city planners and corporations too would hopefully buy into the fact that if we do want high density to go high rise, we should really equally increase the amenity we provide for our users.
Yeah, can I just ask you, Sou Fujimoto?
Yeah.
I mean, in Tokyo, we're seeing these huge tower blocks. Currently, a lot of them are quite empty. Workers have scattered all over the place. They're working from home. I mean, is this the end of the corporate headquarters, do you think?
Well, I think it is not like something is ending and then something new is starting, but I believe the previous urban development and those kind of the huge towers still continuing, but more different options of, for example, working places or the eating places or recreation places are adding. So it is more like a more mixed and diverse. Yeah, for example, I should have brought the image, but I'm now involved into the design of one of the tallest building in Japan, which will be happening in years. And we proposed to create the place for the people on the top part of the high-rise building, which have been like the closed, enclosed object previously, because this is like the semi-outdoor spaces and like an urban plaza in the sky. So even in the top part of the upper part of the high-rise buildings, we could create such an urban plaza-like spaces where people can come together and to meet together, to inspire to each other. But like a more like a hilly forest, like a natural field-like spaces. So those kind of the superimposing for example, the forest or different typology of the spaces in the existing typology could could change the perception of the high-rise buildings, for example. And then at the same time, on this urban areas, we can imagine, for example, not just making those kind of the existing typologies of the buildings, but suddenly bringing the forest as like a working environment as it is, or the WOHAs, like the tropical, like the buildings. So I believe urban situation gets more diverse. We can have more choices because the fact that we realized in this situation is we need more choices, not just stacked into the small boxes for the online meetings, or not just going out to the open air spaces, but we can just better to have more choices. Then I think, yes, more like a relaxing, refreshings or concentrations and different types of the communications. We shouldn't be like be in one direction. It's more spreading. Yeah.
Yeah, Monsam, can I just ask you, I mean, obviously in Singapore, the skyscraper rules, I just wonder, what do you do in this situation where people are longing for an open window or a window they can open in these big sealed skyscrapers? Can you imagine another use for these buildings, or, you know, or another way of designing them?
I think in the tropics where we opt for a seal typology, the transformation is limited. But I think it's something that I think offices as a use is going to change quite a lot, because we no longer is desk bound. But we do want to bring people together. Social cohesion in some form is always good. And I think the new environment in a office should be one that thinks about how to bring people back, and for what reasons do we bring back. People are social creatures at the end of the day, where people like to see other people, get to know one another, and enjoy each other's company. So we should start to think about less as an office environment, more as a socializing environment that happens to be productive in some sense as well. So I think that makes it so interesting, because your office building will have in the future swimming pools, you have lots of gardens, you have recreational areas, you have sports areas. So it's going to be an interesting future, I think. And I certainly look forward to brainstorming what the future high-rise office building will be.
I mean, I'm interested as well in, you talk about the change in workspace, and it's interesting because suddenly we've had to rethink our office space and our home space, because our homes are now hybrid offices. And I'm just wondering, how long do you think it will be before that filters through into design? Do you think you're going to start to see more people making these hybrid home workspaces? Maybe I'll ask you, so.
Well, yeah, not only between office and homes, but every different types of the hybrid situation could happen, I think. So yeah, in future or in near coming future, one space specifically for some programs is already like not functional, I think. Every space, every buildings could have like a multi meanings or multi-functional, and then properly like mixing different programs, working places and staying programs, and then the park, recreation and sports, and melting them together, like creating a nice transitions. Then we can have nice choices during working hours, but just 1 minute or 5 minutes to walk in the middle of the forest. That could be, yeah, wonderful.
Yeah, because I also think this year we've all realized, or over the last year, we've realized that nature is so valuable. We really need it, because we're having to stay in one place a lot of the time. So if we have that on our doorstep, I think that's also changing. And I know both of you, greenery is such a huge part of your work. Maybe from the Singapore point of view, greenery, I'm seeing your wonderful sky gardens. Is that now really an element that you're using a lot?
Yes, I think so. In fact, I think now that we have been sort of putting sky gardens and terraces in our buildings for almost over 20 to 25 years, we have also been able to do post-occupancy surveys and data collection. And what is really quite interesting is like one of projects, WOHA Hotel downtown, where it's all clad with a lot of creepers, and it has got 3 lovely large terraces and filled with trees. We've been able to make validation and projections of what ecosystem services the landscaping in the building can actually produce. So this building sits on an entire a plot of area, almost 100% site coverage in the city. but it actually performs 30% of the ecosystem services as compared to a lowland rainforest. So this is actually very fascinating for us, because if we actually did that maybe more than 3 times, you know, even if the building sits on the ground, it has got no landscape on the ground itself, but because it has got landscape vertically, it actually performs the ecosystem services of a rainforest. And I think from a city planning perspective point of view, that's actually quite revealing, and has lots of implication on what we can actually do with buildings.
And can I just ask as well, the people who are in the buildings, I know you've spoken about this, but it seems like that presence of nature has a very beneficial impact on their mental well-being.
Yeah, I think, in fact, the one that I just referred, WOHA Hotel Downtown, when the building was coming up, because it's such a, it's in an area where it's very similar with the conditions of New York, where towers are just side by side, so you actually can see across to the other buildings. And the occupants on the other building, the neighboring building, was really alarmed and started complaining to the developer and all that. But when the building started finishing and you could see the swimming pools, the gardens, and the creepers on the side, they suddenly say, okay, now my real estate value has gone up, you know, because there were gardens to look at, there were pools to look at and all that. So not only, you know, do we make people happier in terms of the environment that we create for them, but they also bring about a good real estate value.
Yeah, I mean, do you find that as well, Sou Fujimoto? I mean, obviously,
yeah.
you know, it's such a characteristic of your work that you bring nature into a building, quite literally, in the wonderful house end that you showed us earlier. I mean, it's the extra room, isn't it? The outside comes in. Have you found that the people living in those buildings, do they talk about that, how it improves their well-being?
Yeah, I think, for example, they talked about not only the physical tree, but in case of the house and the box and box and box house, the skies also like a part of the nature. And then they feel they can like recognize like changes of the skies more clearly in this house. Then they said they feel they're living in the nature, not just by the green trees, but also feeling the whole like environment as a whole. And that is, of course, very like a precious, because it's not in the middle of the pure nature. It is in the middle of the like a housing, like a residential area in the city, but still you feel the nature. And so those ranges or the gradations between such an artificial situation and a natural situation, and then because it is gradient, you can just experience those kind of the different the mixtures in a sense. And then I really agree with the like if people can have more choices, then that must be just simply nice. Because even if you are in the nature, in the middle of the nature, working in a very beautiful environment, but if you have to continue that for 1 year, that must be terrible in a sense. So if you can just change your working places, depends on your feelings or depends on the situations, and choose such a variations and the differences, and fitting to your psychological something or then that must be the most richest situations for people, I believe. That is why we try to blend the different environment, bringing the nature into the buildings, but not just dividing the nature and the buildings by such a strong glass, but more like creating in-between spaces, which could generate such another third situation between nature and architecture, and so on, and then between different programs and the different functions, and so on.
I mean, I like the fact you're able to bring nature into the urban environment, because the reality for most people in a city like Tokyo is they're not getting much exposure to nature, or they live in a very confined plot of land. Maybe they have neighbors all around them. So it's really quite something to bring that sense of your Hokkaido upbringing into the middle of Tokyo. But is it always in your mind that bringing the natural world in?
Yeah, true. But at the same time, I realized it's kind of a very interesting, things in Tokyo, because in Tokyo, of course, at the beginning, I felt, of course, wow, this is super artificial situations. But if you carefully see the small alley and small tree pods or plant pods in front of the small residential buildings, then we realized in Tokyo, they invented such a kind of the arrangement of the small nature as part of their life. And sometimes those kind of small nature is more comfortable and more, human compared to such a huge nature in Hokkaido. And then again, if you only have such a tiny nature, that's a bit sad. But if you have such a wonderful, huge nature and a small nature together, and then you can just choose between them, that must be really nice. And those kind of sensitivity to invent, because I think people need some kind of the nature, and then they invented to have their own nature in their daily life, in very like a human, intimate scales.
Yeah, I mean, you often just see people with pot plants outside their front door, and I love that in Tokyo, particularly in the summer when it's so humid here.
True.
If I can just turn back to Singapore, I was so interested. Your work is it's quite campaigning in a way, Summ. You're dealing with these huge subjects. You're very interested in climate change, and I think it's interesting. How much do you think architecture can really have an impact on these global issues? Can you create social change? Can you stop climate change?
I certainly think that it's possible. Cities are one of the biggest contributors to carbon. And I think, if anything, we kind of need to focus on city to reduce the ecological footprints of city to almost its footprint itself. I think it's very necessary. And that's why Singapore is interesting for me, primarily because it's land limited. And that if we can somehow prove that Singapore can be carbon neutral and also self-sufficient in energy and water and food, it goes a very long way in thinking about how other cities, developing cities, new cities, can take a new form, in a new direction. I think the cities that were kind of designed in the turn of the century, the last century, was very much dictated by the advent of automobiles, and has created cities all over the world that have isolated people into buildings by highways and roads. And this is something I think that I was looking at in our latest series of master plans, where we wanted to ensure that with any given city and area, and how to transform existing city, how 50% can be used to restore and regenerate nature and the planet. And at the same time, the trade-off is that we need to look forward to and plan for the future of mobility, where mobility will be on demand and autonomous. And when they're autonomous, it actually could be traveling in a machine that can create different environment. Like, we don't even know what background I am in, even though I'm putting on a picture, but I could well be in a swimming pool too, but I think that's where I think the future is quite different, and that we do need to see the vision and to design for that, and to be able to transition in the future where we will not rely so much on highways and be dictated by the planning of gridlocks that are dictated by cars, And I think that's something to really rethink, and I think is very, very important and urgent that we actually do that.
Yeah, it's good to be ahead of these changes, isn't it? That's interesting. The architecture shaping the discussion rather than reacting to it. I don't know. Are you feeling the same pull to thinking about what's the future of mobility, work, the way we live?
Wow, yeah, technically and physically, we have a lot of things to improve those kind of the climate conditions and and so on. But at the same time, we have because architecture is creating the place or field for people's activities, then we need to create kind of the concept of our living environment, which could affect people to slightly change our mindset to enjoy more, for example, the nature, which is sometimes unpredictable. So previously, we tried to control such an unpredictable things and shut out and then try to control our environment perfectly. But we need to change our mindset to have a good balances of such an, unpredictable nature things, more like enjoying such a, how to say, unexpected situations, while, of course, creating a, proper controlled situation as well. So, changing our mindset for the new lifestyle or for the new, like a new value of our life is more important. And then architecture could contribute to update our lifestyle too.
That's one of the good things to come out of all this, sort of rethink it. But it's interesting, some of the solutions that you might think of, such as not shutting out the world and not sealing it off, is you're then looking back to traditional architecture in a way, aren't you? You know, many of the problems had been addressed in traditional architecture, hadn't it? Particularly, you know, if you look at, I know you're very interested in the Engawa, this in-between space, this indoor-outdoor space. So do you find you look at traditional architecture much?
Well, the traditional ones, traditional Japanese architecture, for example, or traditional Asian architecture has been, because of our climate, they have been developing those kind of a nice way to be together with the nature and slightly controlling, but not like not against the nature. But of course, at that time, the technology-wise or the material-wise, it's not possible to bring just the traditional things into our contemporary life. It's not functional. So we need to get the inspirations from their spirit, but then have to retranslate or reinvent or reinterpret such a meaning of the life with the nature or life with such a enriched environment, and then try to recreate something for our future by the contemporary way, contemporary materials. So that must be very creative, I think. Yeah,
I think you've talked about that, Monsum, a lot, about coexisting with nature. And I know that I'm amazed to see the pavilion in Dubai. It really did not look like Dubai in any way, did it? And that's so interesting that you're able to bring that sense of the natural world to an environment that has not been known for its greenery.
I think that one was I think there's a term I like to, we've coined and something we like to use is form follow systems. And to unlock the kind of a possibility in an environment like the deserts and in Dubai, our plan was really to try to maximize the solar canopy to harvest clean energy. And when we managed to do that, we thought, how do we then start creating plants under the solar canopy? And because the solar canopy, if it occupies the whole thing, would block the sun. And that's where we also then started working to devise grow lights that would work to provide the necessary sunlight to the plants beneath it. And yet at the same time, we were able to sandwich a whole full floor plate of usable area as well. So I think this is a rather different approach to architecture, which is dictated by sort of wanting to achieve certain systems. And I think that's where we think that that's necessary if we want to tackle climate change, where we can't ignore the fact that we do need to think about clean energy and harvest and self-sufficiency and resilience actually in all our buildings. So that was a sort of a bit of a soul-searching exercise for us, pushing us to limits. It was quite obvious of the solutions we did in Singapore over the last 25 years, but to demonstrate that in a different environment, certainly a harsh environment like Dubai and the desert, was something we felt was a good challenge for humanity. And we took it on, and we hope it will be successful.
Yeah, I like that you take on these challenges. Now, there are so many questions for you. I have to hand, I'll stop asking my own questions. I've got a million more, but we're going to start with a couple of questions from fellows. And now, quite a challenging question for you to start with, from Marco Kusuma Wijaya, who's an urbanist in Indonesia. And I'm not sure how you feel about this, but he says, since urbanization could be said to have caused the leap of an animal-born virus into human bodies, how do you think architecture could rectify or avoid this situation in the future? So is urbanization at the heart of the problem that we're in the middle of, we're still facing? Mm-hmm. What do you think? So Fujimoto, I'll ask you.
Well, it's quite, fundamental, quite tough question, yeah. But I still believe, anyway. Wow.
Did you slightly feel like you were being blamed for the pandemic there?
Yeah, but still, in a sense, myself is fascinated by this kind of the situation which city created, in a sense. It's kind of the densities of the people, energy of the people, and the interactive relationship between the people, and some events and activities, and so on. So those are the things which invented for, so I believe this kind of urbanization is still continuing, but how to do it could be always like reconsidered, and some new ideas should be introduced. No,
it's an interesting one. Can I just ask you, Summ, as well, this idea that too much urbanization has led us to this point where we're actually making ourselves ill?
I think it's not urbanization that's the fault. It is suburban sprawl that's the fault, where we are taking up too much of natural resources and natural capital. That's the fault. We are not giving enough space for nature, and that's causing the collapse of the planet. I think that's the root of the problem, where we have infringed into too much of nature's boundaries that is causing the problem. If the animals were not stressed, they could keep in their own habitat. And I think the situation is such that I think humans needs to rethink about the way we want to continue with urbanization. We need to also look after nature. If we don't look after nature, there is no future for human beings. Simple as that.
Yeah. So you're saying keep the density, but stop the sprawl.
I think it's better to go hyperdense and limit ourselves, and I'm a big fan of Edward Wilson, the naturalist and writer of Harper, where he thinks and postulates that it's necessary for us to keep or to regenerate, to restore 50% of our planet for nature. And we will only limit ourselves to 50%, and that is very possible. And that somehow drives our current thinking and master plan. That's what we should do. And I think it will benefit humans as well as nature. We do need to coexist together.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I know you talk a lot about rewilding. It's very interesting, and I think the context you're working in, it has to be about density, because there isn't really any space to do much else.
Absolutely, we are really in a crucible. Basically, we do need to use Singapore as a very good experiment to see how to handle high density, and yet still create a very livable environment. I think it's succeeding so far, but we can certainly do a lot more.
Now, on to the next question. This is from Akihito Nakanishi, who is Curator of Culture, Art and Education at Portland Japanese Garden. That's a very nice place to be. And the question is, playing devil's advocate here, another slightly challenging question, saying there seems to be more demand for locally based architects on projects. And as you two are both internationally active practitioners, what principles do you keep to when working in unfamiliar territory to avoid transient architectural gimmicks? How do you get yourself into the local context when you're not a local?
Yeah. Well, I myself, like to, kind of be modest and listen carefully to the whole situation and try to understand. So it's more like not pushing from my side, but more kind of accepting or listening, and then starts the communication with the local people. That's, it's simple, but it is important things. So carefully listen to them.
Yeah, and did you go through that process with the White Tree, I'll call it, your amazing building in Montpellier? I mean, because it's so startling, that building, but in some ways that bright white building, it sits perfectly in that Mediterranean situation, doesn't it?
Yeah, at that time it was like I was lucky because we are collaborating with the French, several young French architects. So at the very beginning of the project, we did kind of the workshop for a week, and then they came to Tokyo, and then we discussed about the ideas. But at the very beginning, because I didn't know anything about that region, so they just talk about it, and then I listened, and I try to create kind of the big picture of the project, and then all the surrounding situations, and then finally, we are just following really honestly to the situation. That was the good result. Yeah.
And then funny, because you couldn't have known then, but in fact, when I look at that building now, it's perfect for the COVID times we live in, because you've created this amazing outdoor space for every apartment. You don't actually need to leave your apartment.
Well, yeah, that's true. That's true. Of course, the idea is coming from such a Mediterranean climate, because it is more like a natural to open up your like a living space, and then it was like their traditional lifestyle. But during the process, I realized it's, of course, open up your own house is very important. But then, as a result, you can have more like mutual relationships, even like have a distances, but still you can have a communications, and you feel you are living together with them, all of the neighbors. That was like a more important like a proposal or statement to regain such a like a link to the people and not isolating yourself. Yeah, that was, and then all of them, and then in south of France, the relationship with the people is such a, how to say, like active, like a feelings of the neighborhood and the community, and all of those are quite like inspiring for us.
Can I ask you too the same question, Mansam? I mean, you're working in many different locations. How do you find it dropping into somewhere that is not where you come from?
I think a few things are quite very important to us. Is climate is very important. Climate does dictate the kind of thinking behind how to evolve the architecture. That's very important. The other one too is, I think that is fairly global, is nature. We tend to look at how nature sort of thrive in that environment, and also the climate, and that does give us a very good clue as well. Even in the tropics, we learn a lot from nature. I mean, we all think that plants, no matter how, will thrive in the tropics, but there are subtleties in the conditions of the tropics that also makes them thrive. But the same thing also happens in other climatic zones as well. But one thing that we 100% will try to do is that we don't start designing to revisit the place. I'm not sure, but now that we kind of do a lot of work online, I guess we will still do that. We will take that opportunity to travel there as a social thing, to appreciate the place, the culture, and the subtle sensibilities of the place that we need to think about in our works. So I truly agree with Fujimoto-san. It's something that we do need as international architects. Really, really listen and before we do our bold strokes. It's very important that we are sensitive to different environment, different culture, and a different place. So certainly that's how international architects should go about doing their works.
I like that, sensitivity. That's the key word there. That's a good one. Now, questions from the audience, and there are so many, a bit of a quick fire range of questions. And I'll just go for the first one, which is, under COVID, I am not able to go to university or visit architectural sites. That's a shame. Under these conditions, what do you recommend students of architecture to do? Good question. What do you do?
Wow, it's a good question and a serious question in this situation. But I recommend. Wow.
A good book?
Yeah, of course, good book. But yeah, when I was a student, of course, yeah, I could come out and visit the architecture. But also I was, for example, yeah, I at that time I loved the Le Corbusier, for example, and then only by those kind of the black and white images, but I saw a lot repeatedly his books and his images, and those kind of like your imaginary trips through the books also was very important. And then after many years, I visited his buildings, and then of course on site, it is far beyond the photos. The reality has a power. But when I didn't read those books, then the impression was probably less. So after getting those informations, and then after, inspired your passions by those kind of many images, then it could work for the occasion you really could visit there. So it's not like the waste of the time. You can prepare, and you can, make your imagination much more expanding. So please be optimistic.
I think we've all been reading more books in the last year than ever before. So would you recommend the same thing, Summ? Open a good book?
I recommend that that they should be more open-minded and optimistic. Travel will come back in a couple of years. They will be able to travel again. It's not as if we will never ever travel again. I think travel will be back. And I think there's always a silver lining to a pandemic. The last one, the Spanish flu, actually gave rise to global healthcare systems, and then that's a very positive thing. There will be a lot of positive things that will happen out of this pandemic. We should look forward to that. But I think maybe if you can't travel, and even worse, you're confined to your own house, I think it's necessary to search within ourselves and ask the deeper questions of who am I and why am I here on this planet? And I think maybe a bit of soul searching will be a good thing.
Brilliant. Students, take note. Time to look at yourself. That's a great answer. Next question. How should commercial facilities be built when there will be times when many people cannot gather? Which I think is another good question. You've slightly addressed that already, but what do you think about these facilities that are planning for huge numbers when huge numbers can't be together?
Wow. But anyway, after a few years, it's possible to come, bring people together, but it doesn't mean you can just go back to the previous method, because it's possible to bring many people together, but we can prepare more like variations of different, like diversities of different characteristics, for example, of the places. And also, so those kind of just the one, like a shopping mall, many people come in, that's already like out of the time, I think. It could be more like the shopping mall, but forest, and then the playground and the libraries and so on. So those kind of the combination of the different characteristics and values could bring people more, because they can have more choices around there. And then finally, it could be like creating like a village where you can stay, you can do whatever you like, you can change what you do throughout the whole day. And that must be a wonderful place.
Yeah. What do you think, Summ? I mean, I can tell you optimism is your nature. You're just waiting for those times to come back.
I'm not so optimistic about large-scale conventions and things like that anymore, because I think sort of the digitization has already pushed some of these conferences online, and this is hybrid system of you and Fujimoto-san and me on the internet online is a clear direction that conferences would take. And I think that I was asked this question too, because there were supposed to be a couple of conferences to be in Singapore, whether or not they will happen or not. But I think at the end of the day, conferences are not just for the event itself. It's a good reason for people to get away. I think combining conferences with another purpose, whether it's holiday, whether it's study, or whether it's work, is a good thing to think about. So instead of just focusing on just one purpose, one use, it must be a multi-purpose, multi-layered kind of event or venue itself. So I think that's where I think developers and corporations would figure it out as a matter of time, because it's a matter of economic survival. They would define the solution to it.
Now that's interesting. You say, there should be another purpose to these big events, and this leads on nicely to the next question, which might be about travel. Really, how do you get inspiration for new ideas? That's for both of you, definitely. How do you get inspiration, Sou FUJIMOTO?
Oh, wow, but yeah, mostly I get an inspiration from those kind of the local different situations, the condition of the projects and the local situation, because every time the background is different, climate condition is different, and the history of that area or city is different, and then of course program is different, and then of course the personality of the client is so different. So through the communication or listening to them or the discussion with them, all of the inspirations come out.
So it's sort of responding to life, really, isn't it? That's what happens in life.
Yeah, because the whole world is really wonderful and much creative than me. So I just like how to say, let the whole world tell me what to do.
Okay, that's good. Global inspiration. How about you, Summ? Where do you get your inspiration?
I go to Japan. No, I do two things. I like to go to urbanized areas and cities because the culture is there, the art galleries are there, the museums are there, the intellectual discourse is there. And then on the other side, I need to also go to areas like Bhutan, and somewhere there's all nature, just to refresh myself, to chuck out all these urban thoughts and urban clean your minds again, to refresh it and to start on a better footing. So it's kind of, I get two sides to it. I go to very urbanized areas. I also like to go to very natural places just to refresh myself. So I think that works quite nicely for me.
Yeah. So it's like you need a palate cleanser before you start something new.
Absolutely.
No, I can't believe it, but we're actually out of time, and there are so many more questions, but we have to wrap it up there. Much more to discuss, and I think it'd be interesting to come back to the subject of the impact of COVID maybe a year from now, because it's almost, we're still in the middle of it, so it'd be nice to come back to that later. So thank you very much to our two speakers, Sou FUJIMOTO and Monocle Wong. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say that this series is supported by sponsors, Taisei Corporation, Asia Society Japan Center, Shahani Associates, Mitsubishi UFJ Research and Consulting, the Japan Foundation Asia Center, MRA Foundation, and Tanaka UK Japan Educational Foundation. Long list of sponsors there. And I think it's also worth pointing out that the next session is Friday, February the 12th, 6 p.m. Japan time. And the subject is the Me Too movement in Asia. How can we fight against sexual violence? And the speaker for that one will be the journalist Shiori Ito. It should be a very interesting evening. Thank you very much to you for joining us. And thank you very much to our speakers.
Thank you very much. I really
Bye.
enjoyed. Yeah, thank you.